You may run a Linux server with one or more users. In this case, we have a Linux server with 2 users, and I am logged in as the user guest. Now, any hacker, they will try from initial access, they'll try to become administrator, so become the user root. On any Linux system, there is the user root, and this system can do anything on the system. They have full permissions, a bit like administrator in Windows. So how does a hacker become a root? Well, there are all kinds of tricks for it, and one trick is to use the sudo command. So the sudo command lets you run commands as the root user or the administrator without being the full administrator. Now, typically that is restricted, but not always. So to check if we can run any commands as the administrator, we are logged in as the guest and we type the command sudo -l. And in this case, you'll see we can run the following commands on the Linux server, which we have full permission. So we can do, for example, sudo ls/root. We will look in the administrator folder and you'll see we had no problem to run that command. Now we are still the guest user, but because we can run anything, any commands, we can simply type sudo bin bash, and bash is the Linux terminal. So this will run as root the Linux terminal. You'll see this one line, and we are now the administrator. We are root on the system. So we escalated our privileges from a regular user, the guest user. You see here guest, and with this one line we became root. Now this was possible because sudo is misconfigured. If we had sudo -l, we could run any commands. So if you're a Linux administrator, you want to really limit what commands users can run as sudo at all, or even don't give them sudo permissions, because if they are misconfigured, like in this case, they can easily become root on your Linux system and take over your complete system, install backdoors, malware, and so on. You can limit what users can run the sudo command and which commands they can run. To do that, you type the command sudo vsudo, so this command sudo vsudo, as the root user, as the administrator. So if we run this command, we can now configure, or we can limit what the users can do. And in this case, if we scroll down, we'll see members of the sudo group can run any command. Now, we don't want that, so we're going to comment that out. We add this little dial sign in front that limits it. And let's say the guest user, they can only run some commands like pwd, or maybe they should be allowed to run ls, but not every command. So by limiting this line, by deleting this line, commenting it out or deleting, they can no longer run any commands. And then we add these 2 lines, so they are allowed to run these commands as root. Now, of course, this depends completely on your security configuration, but it's a really good idea to limit the sudo rights. So let's save this, Ctrl-O to save, Ctrl-X. Of course, depends on which editor you use for vsudo. Now, let's try to log in again and see if we can still do sudo. So we'll do exit, and now I'll be the user again. And now you see I'm the user guest. And I do the command sudo -l. And I can no longer run any commands. So if I try sudo bin bash, you'll see that trick to become administrator, to become the root user, no longer works. But if we try one of the commands we did allow, so you see bin pwd, that is allowed. Now keep in mind we specify here the full path. So if I try sudo pwd, it also works. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So we are allowed to run these 2 commands as root, as sudo. You'll see here sudo pwd or sudo ls. But if we try something else like sudo date, that's not allowed because we specifically limited which commands could be run as sudo by this user. So with the sudo vsudo command, you can limit what users can do with sudo, which commands they can run, or if they can run any commands, which is a really bad idea from a security standpoint. So if we go to the guest user and then take a look, you'll see, let's try for this user, user Ubuntu, and you'll see this one can run anything because it has no password here. You see here, no password to run any commands. So with any user, you want to limit what they can do with the sudo command, or you could remove them from the sudo group altogether. You can check which users are part of the sudo group. You can do that with a single one-liner. So with this command, get end group sudo, and you press enter, you'll see which users are part of the sudo group, so which users can run that sudo command. In this case, we have the user Ubuntu and guest. Now, you might not want certain users to have sudo permissions. It could be a security risk, so you can delete them. You can do that by typing command del user, and then the user you want to delete the permissions from, let's say user guest, and we want to remove it from sudo. So I run that command, and you'll see in order to do that, we need to be root. So let's become root, and let's run that command again. So I run that command, and you'll see it removed the user guest from the group sudo. So the user guests can no longer use that command sudo to run administrator commands, and they can no longer become root user itself. So it's very important for security to highly limit the sudo user group, which users are part of this sudo group. And if users are part of the sudo group, don't do a blanket statement where they can be run any commands, as you've seen in this video. Then they can run any command as root and get the root shell. You want to limit which commands they can run as sudo user at all.